to go. But my sister.
Matthew 9:37, and we're going to read through the first verse of chapter 10. 3 verses, 9:37, 38, and 10:1. This is what the word of the Lord says. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field." Jesus called his 12 disciples to him and gave them authority to drive out impure spirits and to heal every disease and sickness. I want to speak for the next few minutes today from the subject, the headache in the harvest. The headache in the harvest. As you take your seat, just look at somebody next to you and say, the headache in the harvest. Look at somebody else. Say, the headache in the harvest. Get one more person, and I promise I'll leave you alone after that. But if you're not too mean, get one more person and say, the headache in the harvest. To reap a harvest has become a part of our metaphoric language. It's a common refrain to say that we want to reap a harvest. But the saying has become so common that I don't think we really understand what it means to reap. And although we have a few holdovers from down south, I would guess that most of us who are in here today are either city dwellers or suburbanites. You may be from Parkside or Centerville or somewhere else here in Camden. You may be from one of the surrounding towns like Pennsauken or Woodland. But whether you're from 8th and Ferry Avenue or Cherry Hill, chances are you don't lead an agricultural life. Even those of you who were raised on a farm have since adapted your lives to this concrete jungle that we call Camden. When we want eggs, we go to the grocery store, not the hen house. I wish I had some help in this house today. Those of you who still smoke, first of all, I'm praying for your deliverance. It's available. You can come to the altar after the sermon. Amen. But I'm guessing that those of you who still smoke, you probably go to the store and get a pack of Newports. You don't have to put your knees into the brown soil and cut the tobacco plant. You don't have to remove the leaves from the stalk. You don't have to hang them and wait for the tobacco to age. You just go to the store and somebody has already done all that for you. So when we say reap a harvest, it's not literal to us. So people are under the misconception that the word reap means to receive, when it really means to work. We've heard so many name it and claim it word of faith messages about seed time and harvest that we're under the misconception that the sowing of the seed is the hard part and the harvest is the blessing at the end. But in reality, the harvest is when you do your hardest work. The word reap doesn't mean to receive. Reap means literally to cut with a sickle or with a reaping machine. To reap rather means to dig, to gather, to pluck up. To reap means to get down in the dirt and wrestle with the crop that you planted so that ultimately it can become something useful. If your neck is not black from the beating rays of the sun, you have not yet reaped. If your arms are not covered in soil and bugs, you have not yet reaped. If beads of sweat have not formed upon your brow and saturated your garments, you have not yet reaped. To reap is to work, and the harvest is the season when you do the hardest work. Not only is it the season when you do the work, but the harvest is the result of the work that you've already done. But without reaping, there can be no harvest. So now we should understand what Jesus means when he says the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Jesus is saying the season for the harvest is now, right now, right now. Jesus is saying the results are there for the taking, but first you have to reap. First, you have to work. If you want to see results, there's no results if you don't work first. I know there's some in the contemporary church who have started saying stuff like money cometh. Money cometh, and they just put that in the atmosphere. If you just say it, it's going to happen. But I need to remind somebody today that money cometh if you goeth to work it. I wish I had a witness in this house. You can say it all you want. If you don't put the work into it, there will be no reaping and there will be no harvest. Remember why Jesus said this. He had gone through all the towns and villages. He taught in the synagogues. He proclaimed the good news of the kingdom in the streets. He healed the sick, raised the dead, fed crowds of thousands of hungry people. He dealt with the Pharisees and with the tax collectors and with lepers and prostitutes and politicians and overlords and outcasts. And he kept seeing these crowds of harassed and helpless people wandering like sheep without a shepherd. And it hurt his heart because in that moment, Jesus felt the limitations of his humanity. In his spiritual form with the Father, he can do everything and be everywhere. But taking on human flesh for 33 years meant that he was willfully taking on human limitations. He who was almighty and omnipotent took on the frustration of not being able to do it all at once. And we always talk about how nothing is impossible through God. Nothing is impossible with God. But we don't like to talk about the inherent limitations of taking on human flesh. Despite all the miracles that he did perform, despite all the sick that he did heal, despite all of the sheep that he was able to shepherd, he couldn't do it all while wrapped in human flesh. So you know what he did? He empowered his disciples to duplicate the work that he did. Because what the plentiful harvest needed was more workers. And can I tell you something? Even if he could do it all himself, that would be of no value to us. Jesus was fully man willfully, but he was also fully God naturally. So if he really wanted to, he could have done it all by himself. He could have, but that wouldn't have helped us. See, that's wisdom. I've learned some wisdom down through the years. If I can make it personal, I'm a pastor. I'm a pastor. And like your pastor, because I know Pastor Watson, like your pastor, God has blessed me with many gifts and talents. I can preach, preside, pray, sing, play the organ, take the offering, count the offering, work the soundboard. I can lead children's church in a pinch. I can lead ministries. I can do everything from the door to the pulpit and everything in between. But here's the thing. I can't do it all at once. Despite everything the Lord has blessed me to be able to do, I do not have the ability to do it all at the same time. And if I tried to do it all, I would be limited by my own human capacity. And not only that, but I would prevent other people from walking in their gifts and callings. Just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should do it. I had to learn that to be a better pastor, to be a better leader, meant that I had to let other people do the work of ministry. And it's frustrating sometimes, because sometimes that means you have to sit back and watch somebody struggle at something that you can do easily. I'm trying to help some leaders here today. Listen, every single type of leadership is not about doing it all, but it's about empowering other people to do it. And if you don't let somebody else struggle to learn the process, then they're never going to grow. If you have to do it all by yourself, that's not leadership, that's limiting. Jesus, as a shepherd, understood that for the full harvest to come, he needed to gather workers who would do the same work that he did. Can I tell you something? I need to help somebody today. We are the workers that Jesus has gathered. All of us here today, sitting in the First Nazarene Baptist Church on this Sunday morning in the month of November in the year of 2019, we are the workers that Jesus has gathered to do the work. It's in the text. Look at how verse 37 begins. It says, then he said to his disciples. Let me remind you that we are his disciples. We are the workers. We are the ones who are called to reap the harvest planted by the seed of his blood, but the workers are few. So in verse 38, Jesus gives the simple instruction that we have to pray. You have to pray. And he doesn't just say to pray for anything. He says specifically, ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. God has already prepared the harvest. God has already planted the seeds. He already watered the field. He already caused the sun to shine on the crops. The field is ready. God has already prepared even the hearts of those who we will speak to, and he will give us the words to say. But our prayer is not just for him to send us out. Our prayer is that the ones we minister to, they be sent out as well. Our goal is not just to be disciples. Our goal is to make disciples. See, a true disciple must be a growing disciple, or in fact, not just a growing disciple, but a true disciple must be a multiplying disciple. Anything that is healthy grows. And eventually, if you're real healthy, then you're fruitful and you multiply. Imagine if we approach our life as Christians in the same manner. That we ought to multiply. If the Lord has done something for you, you ought to tell somebody else what God has done. If the Lord has blessed you, you ought to tell somebody else. And then if they can get a hold of it, they can get blessed just like you have been. By knowing our God. So we do the work of reaping to gather a harvest of disciples who themselves then repeat the process. But be careful what you pray for. Because I mentioned that there is a headache in the harvest. Verse 1 in chapter 10 shows us the result of what Jesus instructed the disciples to pray in the last verse of chapter 9. It says Jesus called the 12 disciples to him and gave them authority to drive out impure spirits and to heal every disease and sickness. Now, can we just live in this verse for a minute? Notice that Jesus called the disciples to himself before he sent them out. See, you can't be sent out until you're first drawn in. If you want to be sent out by God, then the first step is not to go. The first step is to be drawn in. So he called the disciples to him and he gave them authority. Now let's back this up for a minute. Jesus ministered in the towns and villages. Jesus proclaimed the good news of the kingdom and healed their diseases. He had compassion on them like a shepherd has on his sheep. Then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Then he told his disciples, ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field. So that means he was already speaking to his disciples. Now think about the significance of Jesus calling his 12 disciples to him when he was already speaking to them. That means he didn't call them from some far distance away. He didn't call them from across the country or from across town. It wasn't some voice coming from way on high saying, "Come unto me." They were already in close vicinity to Jesus. He was already speaking to them. They were already in his presence, and he called them closer. Can I tell you first, Nazarene, that in this season, God is calling us closer to him. Jesus is saying, I know you're here and you hear me speaking to you, but I need you to come closer. And that really ought to be our prayer. God, bring us closer to you. I can hear the hymn writer singing right now, draw me nearer, nearer, precious Lord. It's not enough to hear God speaking. I need to be close enough to touch his presence. I need to be close enough for God to lay hands on me, because that's where the power comes from. So even though his disciples were already gathered around him, verse 1 says they called him to him. He called them to come to him. But look at what he does next. It says after he called them to him, the next thing he does, it says he gave them authority. He gave them authority to drive out impure spirits and to heal every disease and sickness. Now hear me out now. You want to talk about headache in the harvest? To drive out impure spirits means you have to be around some impure spirits. To heal every disease and sickness means you have to be around some sick people with diseases. I wish I had some help in this house. Did I mention that there is a headache in the harvest? Ministry is meant to be messy. If your ministry is always clean and orderly and predictable, you're probably not doing real ministry. If your ministry involves catering to people who already know who Jesus is and already know how to do church, then you're probably not doing real ministry. Real ministry means you have to deal with people who have never been to church. Real ministry means serving the ones who don't know when to stand up and when to sit down. The ones who don't know the lyrics to the songs that we sing. The ones who don't own a suit in their whole closet and don't have a pair of hard-bottom shoes. Real ministry. It's not just ministering to the grown folks who've been in church all their life. It's ministering to the children, the kids who have PTSD and ADD and ADHD, the ones who don't know how to follow directions and don't know how to sit still. Real ministry means ministering to the brother with the chip on his shoulder who's easily offended, and his first response is always to fight. Real ministry means ministering to the woman. Oh, I'm about to lose the rest of you. I lost half of you already, but can I talk about real ministry? Real ministry means ministering to the woman who walks in with her girlfriend and sits on the front row holding hands the whole service. Or the one who was born as a man and dresses like a woman and comes to church anyway, despite the way you look at him. Real ministry is the Muslim who comes off the street still garbed up, not even trying to be Christian. They just need to get their children off the streets. Real ministry is the one who's tried church, got hurt in church, and now they don't trust anybody, won't speak to anybody, but they're here anyway. Real ministry, not playing church. Real ministry is the one with a personality disorder who doesn't know how to talk to people, who doesn't say hello, who is curt in every time they speak and short and rude, but they show up every week. Can we show them Jesus? Can we model the love and grace and mercy of our Savior? Can we show them that love is patient and love is kind? Can we show them that love is slow to anger and keeps no record of wrongs? Can we show them that love always protects? When our neat, decent, and orderly worship services get complicated, when our midweek ministries are chaotic and we can barely keep up, when we don't even know everybody by name because there's so many new people that we don't recognize coming in every single week, can we do real ministry? The harvest is there. Who's going to reap? This, my friends, is the work of the church. This is real ministry. Real ministry is messy. Real ministry is complicated. But in the harvest, I want to tell you today that even though there's a headache, it's worth the headache every single time. The harvest is worth the discomfort. Let me remind you that we are following in the footsteps of Jesus. He said the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Jesus knows about the harvest. I heard somebody say that he's the Lord of the harvest. In fact, he's the one who sowed the seeds of the harvest. He sowed the seeds when he came into this broken world to deal with all of our drama that we have to deal with every day. I don't know about you, but I'm comforted to know that everything I deal with in this life, God came down and dealt with it himself. He sowed the seeds when they rejected him and criticized him. He sowed the seeds when Judas betrayed him and the rest deserted him. He sowed the seeds when they beat him all night long and put him on a trial. He sowed the seeds when they made him carry his own cross. He sowed the seeds when they put nails in his hands and nails in his feet. He sowed the seeds on a Friday afternoon when he hung his head and he died. But after the seeds had been sown, early on Sunday morning, the seeds had taken roots and the fields were ready for the harvest. After he had sown the seeds, after he had worked the field, now it's harvest time. And that's when he got up. Is anybody glad that he got up today? He got up with all power in his hands. And now, because Jesus sowed the seeds, we can reap the harvest. Can I tell you today that the harvest is eternal life? The harvest is an everlasting kingdom. The harvest means no more pain, no more struggle. One of these old days is going to be over. Is there anybody glad today that the seeds have already been sown? The harvest is plentiful, but he said that the workers are few. Is there any workers in the house? Is there anybody who don't mind getting down in the dirt? Is there anybody here today don't mind putting your hand in the soil? Don't mind the bugs crawling around, because you know that even though there's a headache in the harvest, at the end of the day, it's all worth it. I wish I had a witness today. No matter how hard it gets, if you're doing God's work, it's worth it. No matter how difficult it seems, if you're doing God's work, it's worth it. Some of y'all don't like your job that you go to every day, but at the end of the week, when the paycheck comes, it's all worth it. That's why you get up every morning. That's why you clock in and out every day, because you know that there's a harvest coming. I wish I had some folk who's ready to reap, ready to do the work, ready to work for the kingdom, ready to build disciples, ready to evangelize, ready to go into the community, ready to talk to somebody, ready to tell somebody what they must do to be saved.
To go. What the? My sister. You better jump on board. Where I am now is way too small.